You're listening to Nostalgic 90s,
a straight-edge retrospective of a decade to the max.
We are your OG hosts,
Dan Williams
and Grant Walden.
It is not the 90s yet. Starting in just a few months, we're going to be giving you a week-by-week recap of each week in the 90s. 30 years ago this week, we will be looking back in time and giving you a retrospective of the hit songs, the hit films, what was happening in pop culture, what was happening in history. But we're not to the 90s yet. Where we are, we're in 1981. We're leading up to the 90s. We're going to give you a breakdown of the decade prior to what I think was the most awesome decade, the 90s.
So why are we doing that? I feel like we should clue people in.
Well, you know, I hate this phrase, but I'm a 90s kid, man. I was born at the very end of 1987, so I don't remember the 80s. I remember the 90s, I remember the music, I remember the film. And you know what? I see a lot of people looking back and they're saying, you know, maybe we didn't appreciate this as much as we should have growing up or when we were teens. And you know what? I think it's time we go back and we look at it. It's been 30 years. We have enough distance. We have enough perspective. We can say, here was this thing. It was cool then. It was cool now. Like the Fresh Prince, man. The Fresh Prince is aging like a fine wine.
Absolutely. So here's something, food for thought. Me and Haley, my wife, we were talking about this a couple days ago. Put this in your brain and let it roll around for a little while. The 90s was 30 years ago.
Oh, man, it killed me.
Okay. Hang on, though. Hang with me. 2020.
Yeah.
30 years ago, 1990, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The year 2000, 30 years prior, was what year?
1970.
Okay, there was a massive infatuation in the 90s with the 60s. In the 2000s, there was a massive fascination with the 70s in our generation, right? There has been a massive fascination with the 80s in the younger generations right now.
Oh, so the next one's got to love the 90s.
So it's an interesting thing that it's like, oh, well, we're really super interested in 30 years before our time. And I suppose that's when people become adults and actually...
We get a little nostalgic.
We get a little nostalgic, but also a lot of people have kids, so they're curious about what their childhood was like. So you start kind of reliving a little of your childhood somewhat.
Oh, yeah.
So I just found that interesting to make the parallel of, oh, wow, okay, this makes so much sense why we're so interested.
You know, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but if you look back, you can see it in the 1970s and their love of the 1950s with Happy Days and all the films that just glorified 50s culture. And hey, guys, if you're listening to this, you can look back on the 1950s. And I'm not saying there weren't some cultural things to celebrate, but the 1950s was just full of trouble. It was full of problems. We had a lot of really deep-seated problems as a nation, and
we still do. We've come a long way.
But the 1970s pretended they weren't there. They took a really nostalgic look at the 50s. So maybe this is just something we do as people.
Maybe that's not such a bad thing in a lot of ways. I'm not saying forgetting everything negative, but
sometimes maybe we need to remember the good.
Sometimes we need to remember the good.
Wait on the good times.
Yeah.
So let's talk about 1981, because 1981 was a good year.
Well, before we do that, we are going through the 80s. So if you see this podcast and you're like, okay, this week in the 90s, why are they talking about the 80s? Well, here's why. It's kind of one of those things that we feel like there's so much that led to it. And Dan and I had this conversation before we recorded the first episode that was like, okay, well, where do we start? Do we start in 1989? Do we start in 1990? Well, maybe we should do a month-by-month recap. Well, do we start in the 70s? Or, well, no, we got to draw a line in the sand somewhere.
Yeah, we could honestly probably go all the way back to...
You could just keep going back. But the thing is, we felt very strongly that for our generation, I'm 33 and you are
31.
31, right?
31.
So for our generation, we were born in the 80s. So a lot of why the 90s is the way it is, or was, rather, is that the 80s led to the 90s. Just like the 70s led to things in the 80s. Everything led to what it was from somewhere. You know, with regards to technology and politics and music, it all kind of makes it make a little more sense of our attempt at not talking about the 90s in just this vacuum. Like we were approaching, I mean, this is getting years ahead of us, but approaching the Y2K year 2000 thing. That's a whole deal within and of itself. But the point being is that the decade to come in the future that had not yet arrived at that point had as much of an influence on the 90s as the decade prior. Just like now, 2000 to 2010 had as much influence just as 2020 to 2030 is, because we assume and we anticipate the future.
Yeah, and it's hard to appreciate and really, really call your shots. We're not Babe Ruth pointing to the stand saying this one's going to be a home run. It's hard to live right now and know what people are going to really appreciate 30 years from now.
Well, let me give a book plug real quick, and if you haven't read it, you should. I need to reread it. Generational IQ. It's by Hayden Shaw. I think the book's like a red cover. There's an audiobook version of it. There's, Kindle and physical copies and all of that. But it talks about different generations and goes back to the Industrial Revolution in America and explains why things are the way they are. And it's a very interesting read to understand generations that are not your own, and to understand your own generation a little better, to understand that all things do not exist in a vacuum, and they arrive there, how they arrive there. So anyway, let's get started. So 1981.
Well, my favorite place to start, it's always the music. I like to look at the Billboard 100 at the end of the year and see what we got, because it's, speaking of things that survive 30 years down the road, sometimes it's fascinating to look at the songs that were so huge during that time, and then 30 years later. And I say this as somebody that, I love all music, but I really love the 80s. Some of these songs I look at and I go, never in my life have I heard this song.
Really?
But that's not the case with this one. The number one for 1981, Betty Davis Eyes. You know the song, right?
Oh, of course.
Can you tell me who did it?
I can hear it in my head. Was it not Rod Stewart?
Kim Carnes.
No, that's right. Why did I think that was Rod Stewart?
In a million years, I love that song. In a million years, I couldn't have told you it was Kim Carnes, but 1981, it looks like she was on top of the world. But number two, maybe it's another timeless song as well, Endless Love, Diana Ross and Lionel Richie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the 90s...
Now, Lionel Richie. I love that guy's voice.
Oh, I've got
what a
this.
songwriter.
I got this album on vinyl. It's fantastic. I learned this song... my first exposure to this song was from Friends. Chandler had a breakup, and he was sitting in his living room listening to the song on his headphones. Phoebe comes in, and they sing it together as a duet.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, see, again, Friends. We got to get to that. But
I can't wait.
That's as 90s as it gets. And I actually, a couple months ago, maybe 6-7 months ago, I started and watched all of Friends. I had never watched it from beginning to end.
How'd you like it?
I appreciated it more now than I did then, quite frankly. Did the same thing with Frasier.
Oh, yeah,
Frasier. And then I went back and I've started watching Cheers. And, Frasier's a better show, in my opinion. I probably got hardcore Cheers fans throwing things now.
I've got a friend,
That's
Sean
not me dissing
Fungafat,
on
who's really
Cheers,
unhappy with you right now. I got a friend, Sean Fungafat, that's really unhappy with you right now.
But, I mean...
Hey, Sean, I hope you're listening.
What's
if
up?
not, I'm just going to make fun of you.
But no, in all seriousness, the fact that 80s culture was something that, like that song being sung in a 90s sitcom,
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense. So to kind of retrospective to the 80s a little bit.
Yeah, that's why we really have to start in the 80s and go forward to the 90s, because
It just didn't make sense to start in 1990.
no.
But yeah, keep going, man.
So number 3 was "Lady" by Kenny Rogers, which is a great song.
Which was another. Okay, so wasn't that a Lionel Richie song originally?
Let's see. It was a song written by Lionel Richie and first recorded. So Lionel Richie was running the world in 1981, it looks like.
Yeah.
He had this number 2 song and number 3 song for that whole year.
Well, and I gotta be honest, as much as I love Lionel Richie's version of that, I gotta admit, Kenny Rogers, I think, is better.
He had the voice for it.
Oh, it worked.
He had the
It was so
gravitas.
good. All right, so what else are we looking at?
All right, so number 4, I hope you guys listened to the 1980 episode. If you didn't, the end of 1980 saw the assassination of John Lennon, and 1981 saw his song "Just Like Starting Over," which was released as a single in October, 2 months before he was shot. 1981 saw that song surging and being the number 4 song for the entire year, "Just Like Starting Over," that is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's...
Wow.
Yeah, it's... I still kind of struggle with that. I've never lived in a world with John Lennon in it. But it's interesting to me to see that his... And I love his music and I love the Beatles, but it's interesting to me to see that his death was such an event that it catapulted one of his songs that does not get talked about much today, outside of people that are fans of his music.
Right.
It was enough to catapult it to be the number 4 song for the entire year.
For the entire year.
Yeah, we're not talking about something like Imagine. We're talking about a good track that's just
it's
not
a great
as...
song.
It's not as maybe
But
memorable.
it's definitely not as iconic as Imagine or, a bunch of his songs. But yeah.
Well, and we talked about the same day John Lennon was assassinated. I'm going to say he was important enough to be assassinated. We talked about that same day. A little movie by Dolly Parton came out called 9 to 5.
Right.
That song was the number 9 track for 1981. So
That's fascinating.
and that's a great song too, right?
Well, it's iconic.
Maybe not great, but it's iconic.
No,
I enjoy it.
it really is. It's a good song. It's, I'm not going to hate on it.
Well, and it builds up so nicely. But we're kind of getting the cart ahead of the horse. Number 5 was "Jesse's Girl" by Rick Springfield.
Oh.
It's a great song.
Yeah.
I didn't realize "Celebration" by Kool and the Gang was from the 80s. I thought that was a 70s song.
I did too. Back to the Jesse's Girl. That's a very 80s sound.
Oh, it is so 80s.
That feels like the 80s.
Well, and a lot of it's the synth sounds, It's hard
but it's not even just that. The whole deal, the whole song, the look, the everything about it.
Oh yeah, it's such a great song. I love it. I always get that one and "Your Love" not mixed up, but it feels like those songs need to be listened to together. "Your Love" by The Outfield,
Yeah,
because they have a real similar feel. Real similar feel. But yeah, number 6, "Celebration." Number 6, "Kiss on My List" by Hall & Oates. Number 8, "I Love a Rainy Night" by Eddie Rabbitt.
oh, that's a good one.
We just talked about 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton being number 9. 9 is 9 to 5.
Oh wow, yeah.
And bringing in number 10 is "Keep on Loving You" by REO Speedwagon. Yeah.
I wonder why that wasn't higher on the list.
Well, because you got to look at what it was up against.
Yeah.
Same reason, I look at numbers 15 and 17, and I wonder why they weren't higher. 15.
What is that?
"Rapture" by Blondie. Which, Rapture's an okay song.
You're a Blondie fan,
Well, and 17 is "The Tide is High," which seems to me like a pretty iconic song.
Yeah. So what are we looking at in terms of movies?
Well, there were a lot of songs in the 80s, or in 1981 specifically, that I would have thought were higher. Like 46 was "Hit Me With Your Best Shot" by Pat Benatar.
That is iconic.
Yeah, and it's so far down the list. 54 was "Too Much Time on My Hands" by Styx, which still gets a lot of play. 56 was "Who's Crying Now" by Journey.
Ooh.
So there was a lot of stuff that ended up kind of low on the list that should have been much higher. Like number 65, "Another One Bites the Dust" by Queen. Yeah.
Really?
That far down the list. And
I think a lot of these songs kind of got a resurgent.
Yeah, I think maybe they aged better than necessarily some of their...
They didn't have an initial push like you would expect, but they aged well.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool. But as far as 94 was "Whip It" by Devo. which is an extremely 80s song.
Yeah.
But it seems like it aged really well. But I hate to say I'm looking at the list and I don't see a lot of other stuff that aged really well. So that probably does bring us to movies, right?
So yeah, what films did we see?
Well, it's hard to forget or hard to overstate how important this one is. 1981 saw the release of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Ooh.
Yeah. I mean, and Indiana Jones, maybe it's been, I don't want to say it's been done to death. I'm always really hopeful that we'll see. I love to see these legacy franchises come back strong. Well, I feel like Star Wars came back strong. I enjoy the new films.
I do too. I love them. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been
whatever.
mean to them. But yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark was the highest grossing film of 1981, bringing in $212 million.
And that's a lot of money now, especially then.
Yeah, think about how that would translate. I hate to say I've never seen the second one. I've never seen On Golden Pond.
I haven't either.
But to just kind of emphasize how big of a cultural icon Raiders of the Lost Ark was, it brought in $212 million. The number 2 highest grossing film of the entire year only brought in $119. Raiders of the Lost Ark nearly doubled it. Number 3 was Superman 2, right? Number 5 is a great one. Have you seen Stripes with Bill Murray?
Oh yeah.
Oh man,
yeah.
it's a great film.
Wait a minute. Superman 2 was
1981.
Superman 1 was earlier. How much earlier than that, I wonder?
You know,
Was it a 70s thing?
let's see.
Because that feels like Superman movies don't feel like they were that old to me.
I'm trying to find out right now. We may have to go back and, I don't want to edit this one, but we may have to put in an edit here. Let's go ahead and see.
Yeah, I'm fascinated.
1978.
So wow, Superman came out in the late 70s.
And you know, when I was
That
a
just
kid, I
doesn't-
remember
that doesn't-
looking back and thinking, you know, it looked old, but I didn't realize it looked that old. That film's aged pretty well.
Yeah, actually. Okay.
Well, and I guess you got to think about it too. 1978, you know, that was living in a post-Star Wars world. So maybe the bar had been raised on special effects. So that might be why it's aging pretty well.
Maybe so.
Or maybe Superman is just such a great character that you're willing to give it a pass. Number 6 was The Cannonball Run. Number 7, Chariots of Fire. I know the theme from Chariots of Fire. I've never seen the film.
I've seen part of it. I was underwhelmed.
Oh man, number 10 is a great one. If you've never seen it, it's so incredibly campy. But it's a Terry Gilliam film. Time Bandits.
I haven't seen that.
Oh man, it's so incredibly campy. But it's peak Terry Gilliam. It's great. It's kind of sci-fi fantasy. It's hilarious. You know, it's honestly, it's really great. I can't overstate. I don't know if you like the 1980s campy fantasy sort of thing. I would recommend it for fans of The Labyrinth. I would recommend it for fans of The Dark Crystal, that sort of thing.
Okay. Now, I really like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth.
Then you would probably enjoy this.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it's,
yeah.
Man, I didn't know.
Well, I'm a
it
huge
existed.
David Bowie fan, too.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well, plenty of David Bowie in the 80s, but we haven't seen as much yet. Now, of course, there are plenty of iconic films that were released in 1981 that had nothing to do at all with the box office, right? They weren't box office hits, such as An American Werewolf in London.
ooh.
It came out in 1981, and it's kind of turned into a cult classic, right? I think that's fair to say.
So, what's happening in politics? What did we deal with in 81?
Okay, so 81, it had some pretty big events. So let's see. Well, this is not politics. We got to find a way to put this in here somewhere. The first DeLorean came out in 1981.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, so that kind of,
So that's fascinating.
yeah, Back to the Future wouldn't be Back to the Future without the DeLorean. But so Rupert Murdoch in 1981, Rupert Murdoch bought the Times and the Sunday Times. So we saw in 1980, we saw Ted Turner launch CNN.
Right.
We're seeing Rupert Murdoch, you know.
So you're seeing a pattern of people getting into the more mass news outlet.
Yeah, and this happened in February, so it looks like somebody somewhere flipped a switch and said it's time for mainstream news.
Right.
So also in February, Buckingham Palace announced the engagement of Prince Charles and Diana.
Yeah, that makes sense.
February 24th. Yeah. So let's see, other really cool things that happened. Cats opened May 11th. That's not a political event, but it's Cats. Come on, we're going to talk about it. So iconic event that happened. You remember John McEnroe? Tennis player, famous for his terrible temper. That happened on June 22nd. That turned out to be a thing. So let's see. Now, in July, there were mass riots across Toxteth, Liverpool, and then they would spread to Moss Side, Manchester, and then other towns and cities across England. On July 29th, Prince Charles and Lady Diana would get married. Here's a fun one. August the 1st, MTV starts broadcasting in the U.S. August 1st, 1981.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So there was a few years of music.
Here's some trivia for you. Do you know? Yeah, they would go on to broadcast music for about 2 years. Do you know what the first video they showed was?
No.
Video killed the radio star by the Buggles.
Wow, that's ironic.
Oh yeah, somebody was being really clever. So September 25th saw the first female Supreme Court justice be seated in the United States. That was Miss Sandra Day O'Connor, or rather Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. So
okay.
Yeah, it was a busy year because then in November, Buckingham Palace announced, that Princess of Wales, that would be Diana, right? The Princess of Wales.
Mm-hmm.
She was announced pregnant November 5th, and then William would be born in June 1982, but that's next year. Then Britain got hit by 105 tornadoes in a single night, November 23rd. Which is really strange, right? Because
you don't think of there being a lot of tornadoes in that area. Maybe I just don't know enough about their weather.
Well, no, there's really not. North America gets a lot of tornadoes because our mountain ranges run north to south, and it mixes hot and cold air. Whereas most of Europe doesn't really have the geological formations necessary for that. But I guess a big way to close out 1981 as far as news and politics goes, December 13th saw Helmut Schmidt, the West German chancellor, visit East Germany, and that was the first official summit in 11 years. So you were starting to see the wheels turn for reunification in Germany at the end of 1981. So for those of you listening, I know I'm a teacher, and a lot of my students, they don't realize, or maybe they do in a historical sense, they don't think about Germany being split into two countries as recently as, 35, 40 years ago. That's over twice their lifetime ago. I mainly teach college freshmen, so they don't think about stuff like that. But you're listening to this podcast now, and we're talking about leading up to the 90s and the world that was the 1990s, and this is part of it, right? We're leading up to the reunification of Germany.
Ooh.
So you were right when we said we could just keep going back and back and back even further,
right.
Because we're talking about an event that arguably, it can be traced all the way back to World War One.
Yeah.
It was coming.
Well, to kind of in sports.
Oh, yeah.
This is pretty significant because I was just looking in 1981, of course. Major League Baseball strike was the first work stoppage since the '72 strike.
Oh,
and the regular season games were canceled. So
what were they striking for? Do you know? Did I just ask a hard question?
let me read down. I don't know.
I'm curious. I'm wondering how much of that might be similar to current, because athletes often have a stage that they can use to bring about social influence. And I was just wondering if this was a we need more money strike or
I don't know. I have to look into that, but I'm not seeing anything really right off just a quick search. But I find that fascinating because, I mean, anytime any big conglomerate, be it sports or, NFL, NBA, MLB, whatever, or, whoever does a strike, if it's UPS or whatever. I'm using a lot of letters. But anytime there's a big strike or whatever, there's some sort of, like you said, social change, or hey, we want or need more money, or it just affects the economy, and it affects a lot of things. It's definitely a topic of conversation for a while. So,
well, and that's fascinating as well, because this is we're looking back in history here is what we're doing. And I was raised being told that baseball was the American pastime. But in my life, I don't really remember baseball being king like everybody said that it was over and over again.
Me neither.
So it's interesting.
Also, we kind of live in Alabama, so football was king in Alabama, and racing, NASCAR.
Yeah.
It's just like, and it's not to say that people don't like and appreciate the other thing. Like basketball is my game. I love basketball, especially college basketball. But and I appreciate football and stuff too. But you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah.
And before we leave, I know we're winding down. I got to tell you about 3 books that were published in 1981 that I think most people are going to be familiar with in some way or another. All right, so I got to start with Shel Silverstein, A Light in the Attic.
Really?
Gotta love Shel Silverstein, and I guess I didn't
Trivia?
know that he was. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He wrote A Boy Named Sue.
Right.
And I always knew him for his poems. I really like his. I love Shel Silverstein.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I got on a kick of reading a bunch of his stuff several years ago.
But we also had Red Dragon released in 1981, the first Hannibal Lecter novel.
Oh yeah. Really? Huh.
Yeah. And it was a good year for horror, I guess, because we also had Cujo released in 1981.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm a big King fan, and I usually think of Cujo as being, I think of it being earlier than that, because, I guess Carrie came out in the late 70s, and I always think of King's real successful early works being mostly in the 70s, but here's Cujo in 1981. So, but then here's one that's getting a movie coming out soon, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, came out in 1981. Yeah. So, I don't know, by the time you're hearing this, that movie may already be out. They're teasing trailers for it now. But you should know, that book came out in 1981. I just had to... Stephen King double dipped that year. Roadwork also came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
but he
well, see, I'm not as hip
Bachman.
to his novels as I should be. I've not actually read a single Stephen King novel. Well, of course, I've watched the movies, and stuff, but
some of his stuff is much better than it gets credit for. It's
while we're on that, not to interrupt you, but why are you such a huge Stephen King fan as a writer?
Okay, so I think King is the master of telling a story and getting illusion and literary elements into the story without necessarily hitting you in the face with it. He's really good at tapping into something that is really big in the public subconscious, digging into these things people are afraid of, but not necessarily talking about, and then expressing them in another way.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, he has a novel, Firestarter, that clearly alludes to the MK Ultra experiments that were going on about 10, 15 years before the novel was written. But it's important to understand that novel was written and published before MK Ultra was declassified and before we knew for a fact that it had happened. In The Stand, he has a one-off line about a genetically engineered virus killing a field full of some kind of farm animal. And he just wrote it off as a conspiracy, but we'd find out years later it would be declassified that actually happened. So King was really good at digging into what Americans were afraid of and just putting it out here and saying, here it is.
Maybe not Americans, but
maybe globally. Yeah.
Humans.
Yeah. And I think that's why I like King so much.
Interesting.
Yeah, he gets a
I can
bad
dig that.
hack as just being, he gets a bad reputation as just being sort of this hack horror writer, but he's anything but.
Dude, if he was a hack, he wouldn't.
Exactly.
I mean, it's very expensive to do a film
Yeah.
on any level, to make a movie. There wouldn't be one, let alone as many as there are films made off of his novels as there are.
Oh, and speaking of films,
if he was a hack.
and I promise this will be the last book that I mention, and I'll shut up and we'll move on to other things or
We're both
wrap it
book
up.
nerds, of course, so
Well, yeah,
it's okay.
I'm an English teacher, is what I do. Jumanji, the novel, came out in 1981.
Ooh.
Yeah, which I got to tell you, I do enjoy the. Of course, I love the Robin Williams Jumanji, but the one that came out a couple of years ago now, with Jack Black and The Rock in it, fantastic.
I
It's
still
really
haven't
enjoyable.
seen it.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be terrible, but it turned out to be really enjoyable. Just don't go
Really?
into it expecting.
I haven't seen it, I guess, because, with Robin Williams passing away and all of that, it was kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
he
yeah.
holds a special spot, and I grew up with Robin Williams, and I'm sure you did too. Like he obviously,
yeah.
it's not like I knew him, but he was.
Like, I actually watched, I got on a kick a couple weeks ago watching Good Will Hunting and.
Oh yeah.
And.
So some of his serious work.
And what's the other movie that's one of my favorite? Dead Poet Society.
Oh yeah.
I watched those in the same
They're
day.
great.
So
Have
I
you
got real deep all in one day.
No, speaking of great serious Robin Williams, he had such serious acting chops. And I feel
yes.
like he gets respected for his comedy, but he doesn't get respected for his chops. Have you watched Father of the Year?
No.
You should go check it out. It's a.
I actually forgot that movie existed, so thank you for reminding me of that.
I'll say this. I didn't know what the film was, and it was recommended to me, and I watched it within the same time frame where he killed himself. And it's an interesting film to go back and watch. It's a great film on its own. I don't mean to say it's not, but it's interesting to look at the themes of that film and then look at the end of Robin Williams' life.
Yeah.
It's a good reason for people that struggle with depression and anxiety.
Oh, this
get help.
episode got
Yeah.
serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Hey, I'm yeah. I'm gonna check that out.
yeah, it's a great film. And we started off talking about the 80s, and now we're talking about Robin Williams. But yeah, we were going to talk about the 90s, and
Dude.
with their,
Wait.
it's, none of this stuff happens in a.
I'm sure we're gonna run into. Was Mork and Mindy in the 80s?
That was a little bit earlier, wasn't it? Hold
I
on,
don't know.
because I know that was a spinoff of Happy Days.
Nanu.
Yeah.
Dude, what a great actor. And
I wish he was alive so much.
dude, he's a guy I would like to have just hung out with for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean,
Did you watch the sitcom he was working on before he died? It's called The Crazy Ones. Okay, the title is terrible. It was some of the best television. It was one of the best sitcoms that I had watched.
is that on? Where can I watch that?
I don't recall. I watched it on. It was on either Netflix or Hulu's where I watched it, but I watched it probably 5 years ago.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
Yeah, but Mork and Mindy was the night. It was 1978 until 1982.
okay, so we're kind of in
So yeah,
that.
it's fair to be talking about Robin Williams right now.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of his jumping off point for his career, really.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Well, hey guys, thanks for listening. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. Take Noise Podcasts. You've been listening to the 80s retrospective leading up to the 90s. So
Yeah.
thanks for hanging out with us.
This is 1981.
Yeah, give us a rating and a review. Tell us what you think. And check out our other podcasts too. Polybius, it's our audio drama. And we have interview series going on with Tape Noise Podcast. It's the Muscle Show Storyteller series. We've got a few other things that are happening, so be sure and check it out.
Yeah, check
Thanks.
us out.